Hi, good evening, and thank you for watching and tuning in to You and Your Money. I'm Bryan, your host, and tonight's program we are focusing on estate planning, offering insights and guidance to help you make informed decisions. Over the years, many regular viewers of this program will now be familiar with the basics of estate planning. However, for newer viewers, it's important to note that a sound estate plan should address the following: liquidity analysis, recommendations as regarding your current will, and if you've not done yet one, it is essential you have put one in place without delay, an understanding of how, in the event of premature death, debts will be settled, children educated, and dependents supported. Flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances, a strategy to minimize costs, including both tax and estate duty, considerations of a trust where appropriate, particularly in cases involving children under the age of 18. And joining me this evening are my resident guests, Harry Joffe, Head of Legal Services at Discovery Life, and for the first time, Terry Berkowitz, Attorney at Terry Berkowitz and Associates. Harry, Terry, thank you very much for joining me. You know, it's very important that someone, you, Terry, in winding up estates and the difficulties and serving of executor. I mean, what challenges do you come across? Because obviously there are a lot of things that take a long time, which delays the winding of estates. So what are the challenges, and what advice can you give our viewers about preparing for, unfortunately, early death?
Yes, so Bryan, there's a lot of challenges being an executor. Some of the main problems that I come across in my matters is that people don't know, firstly, where the original will is. They bring me copies. So we need the wet ink will, so that's very important to be kept in safekeeping. But besides the will, there's other factors that one needs to take into consideration, and that's the keeping of other original documents, such as title deeds for your immovable properties, building plans, contact details that are registered at SARS. That can delay the matter a lot, because SARS, in order to take over the tax profile, your contact details get sent an OTP. And that can take many months if we can't get access to your SARS profile in order to finalize your tax affairs. Some of the other things are liquidity issues, the estate not having enough cash flow to settle taxes, executor fees, and other immediate costs like your City of Johannesburg bills and electricity costs, etc.
Terry?
Right, sorry, I've got to add in one thing here, because cases we always get, clients forget to revoke their previous wills. So you then have these various wills floating around, and one is later, one is earlier, and they contradict each other. So we had a case in Durban recently where this client died on a Wednesday. On the Tuesday, he had two wills that he signed. One obviously in the morning, one in the afternoon. One left everything to the wife, and one left nothing to the wife. Now, we know what happened. He had a fight with the old girl one last time, and he cut her out the will. But of course, they were both signed on the same day, and we weren't sure which was the later will. Because, I mean, you don't timestamp a will, you date stamp it. And that's going to end up in court.
But that's quite unusual, Harry, because wouldn't you normally have a clause in a will that says, this is my final will, and all previous wills
Well,
are
you
null?
should have that, but I mean, if sometimes it's not so clear from the will. In this case, when they signed on the last day, you know which will was the later. So important to revoke the will and to make it clear that you revoke everything in all the previous wills.
And also, particularly, maybe you comment on this, if someone's got assets offshore and they've created a will overseas, then both wills must make sure they're congruent, number one, and one deals with South African assets and the other and excludes offshore assets.
Absolutely. Very important that when you have offshore assets and local assets, that the wills don't contradict each other or cancel each other out, and that the local will refers specifically to your local assets and your offshore will to that specific jurisdictions, and that they are originals of each.
Harry,
Right, sorry,
have you had a case like that?
Well, as I told you before, Brian, we've just launched Discovery Wills and Trust, and I had to tell you on air that we've just done that. But it's quite tricky now when a client answers the question. So, you know, there's three scenarios. Scenario one, client's got local assets only. So then the will says this applies to my worldwide assets, obviously. If they got local assets and offshore, then of course, as Terry says, and you want your local will to be local assets, your offshore will to be offshore assets, and no contradiction. But sometimes the local will is going to cover foreign assets. Now, for example, you've just got a bank account in London or a unit trust, which you can cover in your local will. Then it's still going to apply to worldwide assets. So it's quite important to get the client, what do they want to do? Do they want it local only or local and offshore? You know, and Swiss assets, they have our correspondents have been telling us, the Swiss authorities want those Swiss assets mentioned in the South African will. They don't want to probate in Switzerland. So then you want to mention your Swiss assets in your South African will.
So it's vitally important, Terry, that you have signed both wills, and then you can deal with it accordingly.
Absolutely, but not only the wills, but an executor who knows how to deal with it. I've had many cases where executors just don't know how to get the documents apostilled at our master and sent overseas. It's a very simple process, yet some people don't know how to do it, and the asset companies offshore won't release the assets until they receive certain documents that have been apostilled by our master of the High Court. And that's a big delay that I've seen when I get handed over matters. And it's really a simple process, but a lot of executors don't know how to do it.
Harry, the costs involved. I mean, can beneficiaries be called on to pay any costs while the estate has been wound up?
Yeah, they can, Brian. So, I mean, the most important one, obviously, is tax. You know, if there's tax shortfalls in the estate and the estate is now illiquid and insolvent potentially, then they might have to cough up some taxes. We find it often with illiquid estates. You know, we had an estate recently where there were only shares in a private company, and the executor couldn't get rid of those shares and couldn't sell them, so the estate's totally illiquid. If you want it to be wound up, the heirs are going to have to pay money in. And I'm sure even Terry, who does a lot of pro bono work, won't take on a very illiquid estate if there's, you know, you can't wind it up and there's going to be issues with heirs. So you must have cash and liquidity in an estate. And
Terry, quite a difficult one to turn someone down who comes to you to wind up estate. I mean, and you look at it and there's nothing in the estate and there's going to be problems. I mean, you don't have to take on acting either as an agent or executor if you don't want to.
No, you're not forced to. You have to do an evaluation of the estate. I just had a matter now where a few R100,000 was owed to SARS, but because there was only an immovable property which the surviving spouse was living in and vehicles, and there wasn't proper planning in his portfolio for any cash, there was no cash in the bank accounts, and the life cover paid out directly to the spouse. So I had to make a very...
She was the beneficiary.
Yes, but I had to make a very difficult call to her because she thought that would be her life savings, that pay out from her life cover. So I had to call her and say, you know, there's R400,000 owed to SARS. We obviously can't sell the house that you're in. She didn't want to sell her holiday home either, or any of her husband's vehicles for sentimental reasons. So it was a very difficult discussion to have with her, but she will have to find the cash because it's not an insolvent estate, SARS still wants to get paid.
And because they're, as you say, fixed assets that are not going to be sold and cash realised.
Right, sorry, I mean, so, you know, it's important here, obviously, that there's an insurance policy paying often into the estate because then it creates a cash. But here's an important little trick for our viewers, because if you're paying a policy into the estate, obviously that's estate dutiable, but it could create executors' fees on that policy. So what we do, if it's a discovery policy paying into the estate and we're an executor, we've got a special arrangement. We don't charge executors' fees on those policies because it actually helps us. And there's more liquidity, there's more cash in the estate. So that's something maybe to talk, clients can discuss with their executors and their will drafters. If we've got a policy paying into the estate, can you at least drop the executors' fees because it helps the estate, helps the liquidity position?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Important to have life cover payable to the estate and not only to heirs outside of the estate.
Yeah. Terry, let's talk about parents and grandparents leaving money to minors, children. I mean, we've had Mervyn Messias talk very much about the difference between a testamentary trust and a bottom drawer trust. You know, as maybe creating a trust now where proceeds will be paid as compared to a testamentary trust, where in a testamentary trust, you leave it to the executor to put all the terms and conditions. What do you favour?
I'm in favour in whatever is the most cost efficient. If you can get an attorney who knows how to draft a good testamentary trust, I don't see an issue with them. The reason why people want you to use a living trust is because those can be amended after you die, which means it can keep up to date with various changes. But if you create a discretionary testamentary trust and allow your trustees those same powers, your executor and trustees do have that flexibility. So you can allow for earlier terminations, you can allow for certain amendments to be made. So it's just really who drafts that testamentary trust. And it's really important that a trust or other provision is made for the minor children. A lot of people think that because you're my executor, you'll be able to manage the funds for the minor children. Me as the executor, I'm forced to pay the money over to the guardian's fund, which is administered by the Master of the High Court, when there's no provision for a trust and or a person that it should be paid to be held in safekeeping. I'm in favour of any living, testamentary or using a guardian, as long as it's not going to get paid over to the Guardian's Fund, which is a massive risk for the family.
Yeah, Bryan, I mean, we often have this, just to add on, I agree with whatever Terry's saying, but just to add on, it's all very well setting up a testamentary trust or an inter vivos trust and having a trustee, but who's going to pay them? I mean, if you've got R500,000, and we've had a lot of these queries on the show, Bryan, I've got R500,000 going into trust for my kids or my grandkids. Very few trustees want to take that trust on because there's not enough fees in that trust to pay their work. So, again, an insurance policy is very important here to create the liquidity to cover those trustee fees. Of course, we've got a specific trustee benefit on our product, and a few other insurers have as well. But you need to think about that, number one. Number two, the power we find often as well, clients say to us, I want a testamentary trust. It must end when my kid turns 25. Now the kid turns 25, but he's gone off the rails. He starts supporting Man United, Bryan, or worse, if you can get worse than that. So now the trustees have to have this power, as Terry said, to either advance or pay out earlier or delay and pay out later. So all our clauses have got that the trustees can decide if it's in the beneficiary's benefit not to pay out even at the prescribed age, but to delay the payout.
Terry, why do people in South Africa think that you said 500,000 going into a trust, there's anything to do, and why there should be costs? Just explain to us what you as a trustee would have to do. I mean, as executive, you're winding up the state. But if you're a trustee, why are there costs?
So the executive fees are very straightforward because, as you know, it's a once-off fee on the value of the estate, and it goes in and you finish the estate and you get your fee. But as Harry was saying, the trust can go on for a long time, and so that's where the costs are, because the trustees, their duties are to look after the funds. Although there can be an investment advisor who's helping you, they still will charge for their time in order to look at the trust assets. They will have to submit the tax returns. They'll have to make payments to the beneficiaries, especially if there's minor children. They'll have to take an analysis of what their costs are, their school fees, their medical costs. You can't just, they won't just be able to pay out every request, because the funds obviously need to last for a specific period of time. So that's why when there's limited cash in a trust, it does become tricky. But you can always agree your trustees' fees before you die. A lot of people think you can't do that, which you can do. You can even agree your executive fees as well.
But
Bryan,
Harry,
also don't
there is
forget
work to be done.
And
Not as if
No.
you've got the money.
No, and
Okay,
there's personal
Harry,
liability, Bryan, don't forget
you're gonna,
that.
You're going to put a pin on that because we've got to take a short break. Stay tuned. We'll be back shortly.